This week in Louisiana agriculture.
One Louisiana parish is under a groundwater emergency. I'm Kristen Oakes, and I'll show you why up next.
It's a trap, and this guy hopes you get caught by it. I'm Avery Davidson with that story ahead.
I'm AJ Sabine. You know, there's only one place in the world where you can find Parish tobacco, and it's right here in St. James Parish. I'll have more on that coming up.
Hello everyone, I'm Michael Dana. Thanks so much for joining us. 47 days of temperatures above 100 degrees. That's what farmers and ranchers around the Shreveport area have endured over the last 6 weeks. In the state's hardest hit area of Caddo Parish, the Louisiana Department of Natural Resources has declared a groundwater emergency. Area farmers know the condition all too well. They say their crops have been growing under drought conditions since June. This week in Louisiana Agriculture's Kristen Oakes shows us how the record heat and drought could drive some farmers and ranchers this season out of business.
They say rain makes corn, but these stalks have yet to see a drop of it this season. That is, until now. Just as the combines shift into full gear, the storm clouds roll in above John Stone's farm. Stone checks the weather on his iPhone as he waits out the storm from the seat of his pickup truck. Like other farmers in Caddo Parish, he's prayed for rain all year, but it may be too late for this crop. He says the damage has already been done.
We're in a severe drought here in this area. The heat doesn't help anything, especially when it comes to corn, because after it gets above 95 degrees, corn doesn't pollinate, and we've had above 95 degree weather since June.
This year, Stone planted 900 acres in corn, hoping he could cash in on the nearly $7.50 a bushel price.
We were sitting here looking at these prices going, man, we really stand a chance, and we jumped in the field and got some corn planted, and early on it was, we really had a shot. The crops were looking good early, and it turned hot and dry fast. That was a combination for disaster, really.
Disaster is correct. The drought and the heat left Stone's harvest much lighter than he hoped.
We've seen some record low yields. Some places cutting 20 bushels to the acre, some 100, but probably averaging around 60 to 75 right now.
Dry corn is one thing, but it fared better than his cattle. The drought forced Stone to sell 2/3 of his herd at the sale barn last month.
Oh, it's been real hard on them, the heat especially. I mean, the drought is bad enough that you can always feed something to the cattle, but you can't make them get up and eat it.
He plans to sell his remaining 75 head before the winter. He says it's because there's no hay anywhere in his area.
A lot of people baling these corn stalks, and a lot of people out of Texas are coming over here and buying the corn stalks from the guys that are holding them for backups. It looks like it's going to be a tough winter.
Even after a tough second year of farming, Stone says for better or worse, he's sticking with it.
This is something that I feel like I was born to do. I love it. It's a way of life that I wouldn't take. As long as I can afford to do it and feed my family, this is what I'll do.
It's that kind of attitude that drives John Stone through the storm. In Caddo Parish, I'm Kristen Oakes for This Week in Louisiana Agriculture.
The Department of Natural Resources Conservation order does not restrict agricultural water use, but does prohibit residential lawn or golf course watering and the filling of ponds and swimming pools. State Fire Marshal Butch Browning and Commissioner of Agriculture and Forestry Dr. Mike Strain jointly issued a burn ban for parts of Louisiana impacted by the drought and high temperatures. Commissioner Strain is standing by with This Week in Louisiana Agriculture's Avery Davidson to give us the latest. Avery?
Mike, as you just saw in Kristen's story, it is very hot and dry up there in northwestern Louisiana. Joining me now is Commissioner of Agriculture and Forestry, Dr. Mike Strain. Commissioner,
good morning. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Commissioner, you've been up there. You've seen the damage. What do you think we're going to look at as far as disaster in that area?
Well, when you look specifically at northwest Louisiana, north central Louisiana, when you look at the drought index, we're in an area of what's called exceptional drought. As you've seen now, we've had a considerable time period. We're over 16 inches below normal in this particular area. Other areas of the state are still around 7 inches below normal. And when you see there's this persistent high pressure system that is coming across the plains through Texas, parts of Oklahoma, and is extending into this region of Louisiana. And what we've seen a record number of fires, and we've seen a lot of grass fires, woods fires, but also now lightning strike fires. You've seen a lot of, quote, heat lightning. And we have issued a burn ban. Butch Browning, he is the fire marshal, and I have issued a burn ban on 29 parishes. Now, if you are a prescribed burner and you are following the rules, You know, for good agricultural practices, you are exempt from that burn ban if you're a prescribed burner. But that means you are still responsible. So we're asking everyone to be careful. Last time we issued the burn ban, it helped us. It cut down the number of fires we would have to fight in half. But this is very, very critical. Don't go out burning trash. Be careful what you do. Don't have outdoor flames, because remember, when we have these conditions, and this is one of the greatest droughts that we've had in this century. And for our neighbors in Texas, they will tell you this is the worst drought they've had in a century.
Yeah, over there they're looking at $5.3 billion in ag losses.
That's right. A third of the cotton crop has already been lost. A lot of the corn. If you look at the markets, all of the markets now are reflecting two things here in the southern part of the United States, and which is the drought, and of course before that the flooding. And you've seen now the record prices in the commodities. And you've seen that now, as of this morning, they're talking about now the limited amount of available corn that we're expecting at harvest compared to usage. And so there's some discussion about how we're going to do that and how it's going to be affected. Also, you've seen corn prices. As of this morning, corn was about over $7.15, moving towards $7.20. And some of the discussion, well, we believe that foreign countries would decrease the amount of imports when corn hits $7.15. That's not the case. And so now all of the industries that depend on corn, you're going to see some changes in that marketplace. But this drought is serious. And when you talk about the drought, we look at, under the drought index, the first top 8 to 10 inches of soil and the top side as well. But the long-term implications, if you listen to all the climatologists, they will tell you we expect this at least another 90 days. We're having that La Nina effect. And the high pressure system is so great, even though the Gulf of Mexico now is over 90 degrees, it's hot. It has been pushing those hurricanes out and going up the East Coast. So we need to pay particular attention to it. We are in continuous contact with Willie Cooper and the Farm Services Agency. Also, in Washington with Secretary Vilsack's office.
I know when I went to Ray Scheck-Snyder's farm, he had cracks in the ground upwards of 8 to 10 inches deep. And you were talking about the burn ban. That's a demonstration of just how dry it is out there. But you are also dry when it comes to funds and having firefighters. I mean, when I spoke to you just, a couple months ago about the forest fires, we already were fewer than 1,000 acres away from tying all of what burned last year. Where are we now?
We explained to the legislature that you cannot cut our funds anymore. We will fight fires with all that we have and all the assets we can bring to bear. But the absolute numbers is we are experiencing a higher degree of fire pressure with more limited resources than we've had in the past. And what we have done, we are reallocating resources. We're moving additional crews into that area. We're going to do some things internally to try to free up more personnel to do all we can with what we have. And if I can find some additional monies within the department, we will bring back some personnel in that particular area. But we are the firefighters for all non-structural fires in the state. We're there to work with the local fire departments, and the local fire departments have been picking up a greater share of that burden to deal with those small grass fires and protecting the home. But also what's happening, a change, is that now you have more homes in what we call the wildland home interface. The homes are being built closer to the forest or in the forest. So now we have a greater challenge. We are to put the fire out and control it on the wildland, but we also are working to help the fire departments protect the homes. But though that junction has become tighter, it's changed and it's become more critical, and we're going to stay on top of that. I know Wade Dubay, our state forester, we have meetings. We've also been working with Butch Browning and a number of the fire chiefs on that issue.
I know that when it comes next legislature, you'll be talking to them, trying to restore some of those funds. Thank you very much, Commissioner Mike Strain, for joining us. And Mike, we're going to keep a close eye on the drought conditions and how it's going to affect farmers for the rest of this harvest, as well as the burn ban that's ongoing. Back to you.
Avery Davidson, thanks. During tough economic times, theft, particularly in rural areas, usually increases. One type of theft that is devastating to landowners and rural residents is the theft of timber. So, how do you steal a tree? Well, for unscrupulous loggers, it's nothing more than crossing over into a non-contracted stand of timber, cutting a few trees, then mixing them in with logs under contract. Buck Vanderstein, Executive Director of the Louisiana Forestry Association, says would-be thieves now face stiffer penalties if they're caught trying to steal timber.
Through the Department of Agriculture and Forestry, there's an outstanding group of enforcement people that will go out and help bring these people to justice. We've strengthened the laws in Louisiana that make it more unattractive for people to practice timber thievery.
Now, Vandersteen says the best way to prevent timber theft is neighbors helping neighbors. They can watch over each other's property and report anything that looks suspicious. Well, aside from weather and thieves, timber growers must also deal with animals that can destroy their land and their trees. Beaver dams can flood acres of land, killing pine trees. Ranchers know that coyotes can attack young calves and decimate goat herds. But as This Week in Louisiana Agriculture's Avery Davidson shows us, some trappers are working to teach you how to control these invasive animals and to protect your investment.
These are the tools of the trade.
He cannot access that foot to chew on it or anything.
And this is what they're designed to do.
Do you ever put like maybe a stone or a stick or something?
Kyle Lofton used to trap nuisance animals for the Louisiana Department of Agriculture and Forestry. Now that he's working on his own, it's his passion.
I can't live without catching something. It affects me that way.
That's why Lofton and his friends John Lindsay and Steve Hughes are sharing their knowledge. They know what kind of damage animals like raccoons, coyotes, hogs, and beavers can do to herd animals, row crops, and timber.
If one pair of beavers sets up shop, has a litter, and you get a colony of, say, 10 beaver in there, and they flood 10 acres, and, you know, your timber's worth, let's say, $500 an acre, you know. Do the math. You know, it doesn't take long. There's $5,000 gone from the timber company.
I've seen 200, 300, 400 acres of cropland flooded at a time. And in flat country, this will happen just practically overnight.
Lofton says nuisance animals can cause millions of dollars in losses for farmers, ranchers, and landowners. But for you at home, these animals can do much more.
You have the foxes, the coyotes, the raccoons. They all carry parvo, distemper, rabies, the skunks. You know, there's a lot going on now where the coyotes are coming in, getting the house cats. You know, coyotes love house cats. And the coyote's just doing what comes natural to him because he's feeding the little ones.
And that's why these trappers are feeding others knowledge, so they might learn their passion for trapping animals and protecting their land. In Cheneyville, I'm Avery Davidson for This Week in Louisiana Agriculture.
Now, if you'd like to get in touch with John, Kyle, or Steve, you can visit our website at twilatv.org. Send us a message, and we'll be happy to send you their phone numbers and their email addresses. The next time you fill up at your neighborhood gas station, you might find yourself pumping a little alligator into your tank. That's right. UL Lafayette researchers have developed alligator fat into a renewable source for biofuels. 15 million pounds of alligator fat, which usually ends up in landfills, could produce about 1.25 million gallons of biodiesel. UL Lafayette chemical engineering professor Dr. Rakesh Bajpai says his team has converted 61% of alligator fat into a liquid that could be used for biofuels.
It takes about 12 to 13 pounds of alligator fat to make a gallon of biodiesel, which means that the amount of alligator fat that's available can make maybe close to 500,000 to 1.25 million pounds or gallons of biodiesel, and that can supplement. It's not going to be the final answer, but in a local situation, it can help the industry, it can help the meat producers, and meet some of the energy requirements.
Bajpai says alligator fat could be commercially developed into a viable renewable fuel source, much like soybeans that are used to make biodiesel. Well, Louisiana has its own tobacco road, and it runs through the heart of St. James Parish. As This Week in Louisiana Agriculture's A.J. Sabine shows us, Parish tobacco may be one of Louisiana's lesser-known commodities, but its impact is known around the world.
One by one, each leaf of Parish tobacco loses its stem at the L.A. Poche Tobacco Warehouse in Convent. Since 1791, Parish has only grown here in the heart of St. James Parish. With harvest done, the stem stripping you see here is just one step in a lengthy and labor-intensive process. Parish grower Grant Martin says this tobacco has earned a powerful reputation for its flavor the world over.
Parish is a very, very strong tobacco. It's not commonly found in your regular cigarettes that you would smoke and buy off in the store. The Parish is more or less used for a blend with Canadian tobacco or Kentucky tobacco. It's very, very labor intense. If you don't like the heat, you won't grow tobacco.
Now once my friend Chantrell here takes the stems out of the Parique tobacco, she binds them into these little hand-sized bundles, and then the whole batch is weighed, and then it goes into the barrels to be cured.
The process doesn't end with a year-long curing in these charred whiskey barrels. Parique gets its pungent flavor from high-pressure anaerobic fermentation. See the bubbles? Grant explains.
By keeping constant pressure with the screw jacks, that ferments the tobacco, and that's the process of curing it. And once it's in the barrels, I say 3 or 4 months down the road, all the tobacco in the barrels have to be taken out, aired out. You turn it by hand, let it air out for a few hours, then put back in, which makes a better aroma for the tobacco.
Parique has been called the truffle of tobacco. Martin says he's gratified to carry on his family's Parique growing tradition.
It makes me feel proud that I grow tobacco. You visit some of the tobacco shops and sometimes you see some Parique in it. And sometimes if I'm in the area and we start talking and I tell them I grow the Parique, they say, really? That makes you feel good.
Parique tobacco may be the most obscure cash crop grown in the Pelican State, but it has a flavor that's uniquely Louisiana. In St. James Parish, I'm A.J. Savine for This Week in Louisiana Agriculture.
Many sugarcane farmers in St. James Parish grow a few acres of Parique tobacco as a side crop. L.A. Pochet has been the main processor of Parique tobacco in St. James Parish since the 1930s. Well, still to come on This Week in Louisiana Agriculture, Kristen Oakes will give us some corny facts in her Ag Minute. But first, we'll take a second look at this year's rice harvest. Stay with us. Louisiana rice farmers are more than halfway through with this year's harvest. Weather created some challenges for growers throughout the season, but as Toby Blanchard reports, rice plants seem to have rebounded.
After the difficult season, Ben Leonards, who farms in Allen Parish, is wrapping up his rice harvest.
It was a tough growing season this year.
Extreme heat coupled with dry weather affected his crop. To keep water on his fields, Leonards had to run his pump through much of the summer. Despite the challenges, he is seeing good yields, but he had hoped for better.
It's never where I want it to be. I mean, I love to always, it could always be higher. It never could be high enough.
LSU Ag Center rice specialist Johnny Saychuk says many other farmers are reporting better than expected yields.
I've heard some very, very good yields from the variety Clearfield 151 and some pretty good yields on Clearfield 111 and exceptional yields with some of the hybrids. Kind of depends on where you are, but all the early rice is doing very well.
Saychuk and farmers are optimistic that prices may rise, making this year a little better for farmers. Saychuk says this crop was an expensive one to grow with high fuel costs and high cost to pump water.
A lot of guys were struggling to keep up with water supplies and keep their fields flooded, especially those guys in the southwest area who had problems with salt water and had to, in a couple of cases, actually abandon some acreage.
Leonards was harvesting a field of the medium grain variety Jupiter, which is part of the LSU Ag Center's rice verification program. Farmers in the program agreed to follow Ag Center recommendations on their field. Ag Center agent Barrett Corville is working with Leonards and a farmer in Jeff Davis Parish involved in the program.
We were concerned down there. We had used salt water on it. Probably the last 2 or 3 weeks we were flooding the field, and we thought maybe the yields would have been hurt a little bit, but it still yielded really well.
Farmers also reported problems with insects and diseases, particularly the disease blast. For This Week in Louisiana Agriculture, this is Toby Blanchard with the LSU Ag Center.
The U.S. Department of Agriculture estimates that Louisiana farmers planted 415,000 acres of rice this year. That was well below last year's acreage of 530,000 acres. Well, from harvesting rice to this week's Ag Minute, my favorite person, Kristen Oakes, now joins us with this week's Ag Minute. And Kristen, I know we're always talking about the challenges you face trying to come up with something each week, but despite the fact that we're a farm program, I can't believe we've never done anything on this crop.
You know, it blew my mind when I looked at all the past Ag Minutes. We've never done America's #1 row crop, which is corn. Instead of the usual history lesson, I thought I'd give you 10 facts your mama never told you about your favorite vegetable.
Sure, everyone knows that corn is a yellow vegetable that makes a great side dish at your crawfish boil. But did you know there are more than 3,000 different uses for corn? The main ingredient in most dry pet food is, well, you guessed it, corn. 1 bushel of corn will sweeten more than 400 cans of Coca-Cola. Corn is also used to produce the ethanol in your gasoline. And corn has an incredibly long shelf life. Archaeologists have popped 1,000-year-old popcorn. And did you know corn always has an even number of rows on each ear, and there is 1 piece of silk for each kernel. Today, farmers grow 5 times as much corn as in the 1930s on 20% less land. And American farmers produce 41% of all the world's corn. With so many uses, it's easy to see how corn makes the world go round.
Now today, farmers grow corn on every single continent, well, except for Antarctica, for obvious reasons. Moving on to this week's TWILA Trivia. Last time I asked you, which New Orleans shop is famous for spumoni and other Italian sweet treats? And the answer is B, Bricato's. Now on to this week's question. Which city is home to the world's only corn palace? Is it A, Washington, Missouri, B, North Platte, Nebraska, or C, Mitchell, South Dakota? Log on to our website, twilatv.org, submit your answer, and we'll send you one of our brand new TWILA prize packs. Don't go anywhere, we still have a lot more to come on This Week in Louisiana Agriculture.
How high is the corn this year? Well, not as high as it might have been thanks to some dry and hot weather. Stay tuned for my bottom line up next.
Well, for many parts of the country, the 2011 crop is ready to be harvested. And this week's Bottom Line, Neil Melancon now joins us. And of course, Neil, over the last few weeks, we've been covering how the drought and hot weather has affected crops here in Louisiana. How do crops look across the country with regard to all this heat and dry weather we've had?
Well, Mike, both corn and soybean ratings each slipped this past week, confirming the summer's toll on the crop. While periodic rains have touched the Midwest, most farmers and ag experts think they're too little too late for the crops already maturing. In its weekly crop ratings report, the USDA showed corn at 57% good to excellent this week, down 3 points from last week and well behind both last year and the 5-year average pace. Soybeans also dropped down this week from 61 to 59% good to excellent. The ratings are 5% behind last year and 3% behind the average pace. In addition, corn denting is behind last year's pace, which is probably due to some late planting that also affected pod setting for beans, also now behind last year and the average pace for beans as well. The bottom line is we'll still have a good crop this year, but it will be nowhere near the record we could use, and now we're just trying to see how big the surplus will be. Now, there's been some dropping off of export demand in recent weeks for both corn and beans, so our carryout from the previous year could be larger than expected for both crops. We still have to wait for the October reports to see actual yields and production, but even though we're speculating on the crop size right now, Mike, we know it won't be as big as it might have been.
And I guess, Neil, if there is an upside, it's the fact that commodity prices are high right now, and I guess we'll have to wait on that October report to see how things are really shaking out across the country. Neil Melancon, thanks. And remember, you can listen to any of Neil's reports on the Louisiana Farm Bureau Radio Network for a list of stations where you can tune in or listen online. Click on over to our website, twilatv.org, and look for the LFB radio link on the left side of the home page. That does it for this edition of This Week in Louisiana Agriculture. Be sure to join us next week when we'll tell you how cuts to ag programs across Louisiana and across the country are impacting everything from food prices to public safety. Until then, you can watch any of our stories online. You know the address, twilatv.org. For all of us here at This Week in Louisiana Agriculture, I'm Michael Dana. Thanks so much for joining us, everybody. Hope to see you again right here next week.